So welcome. It's good to see. This is the last salon of the season, and we had a very interesting season. And we like to do a salon on China every year. And I was in March at the Abundance 360. I don't know if everyone here knows about Peter Diamandis, but he's the Billy Graham or Jonathan Edwards of AI and longevity, and I go to this event every year. And I've listened to, maybe 60, 80 speakers over the last 3 years, and the most impressive presentation I'd heard in that time was from Alvin Graylin, who's here tonight. And Alvin is an extremely interesting man, one of the most interesting people I've met. He has a very unique background, which he's going to go through the slideshow and explain his credibility, why he's saying what he says. But I've asked Chas Freeman, our chairman. Chas, are you there?
I'm here.
Good. I've asked Chas to, Chas is our China guru, and Chas was so impressed by Alvin when I introduced him that he insisted on giving Alvin the introduction that he richly deserves. So, Chas, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, John. I'm, of course, the ex-chairman of the committee, but I'm glad to be back at a Committee for the Republic salon, if only on a video link. It's been a pleasure to interact with our speaker tonight, to whom John Henry introduced me only a few months ago. I think you guys are in for a treat. Alvin Graylin is that rare American who not only understands artificial intelligence, having started at least 4 companies involved with the development of AI, but who is au courant with China's AI industry as well as our own. He's a thinker who has important things to say and who says them clearly, even if he tosses in an acronym or two. I remember reading a science fiction novel as a kid in which on page 3 it was revealed that the Pentagon had to be torn down when it was discovered that acronyms cause cancer. I've asked Alvin to keep the acronyms to a minimum in case there are people here tonight who are less immersed in the culture and jargon of Silicon Valley or Zhongguancun in Beijing than he is. Alvin sees AI as bringing huge benefits to humankind and can persuasively describe them. Of course, he also recognizes that the first thing human beings usually do with new interactive technologies like the internet is use them for one-upmanship, warfare, the dissemination of pornography, and the perpetration of scams. As Confucius remarked, the essence of man is gluttony and lust. For some reason, he did not mention greed. I guess he wasn't a hedge fund guy. Alvin believes that it's crucial for the 2 nations leading the development of AI, China and the United States, to cooperate, to maximize the enormous benefits it promises, and to minimize the risks it poses. I find his arguments convincing, and I think many of you will too. We have a great deal to gain from AI if we put the best American and Chinese minds to work at gaining it. Conversely, if we don't work together, we face risks that should be countered or avoided. Will AI manage the battlefields of the future by treating human beings as expendable cannon fodder? Will it do to white-collar workers what automation has done to blue-collar workers, eliminating their jobs and making them redundant? Will it do what another science fiction story I read long ago posited? In that story, all the world's computers were connected so that scientists could ask the array a pressing question. The scientists turned it on and asked it, "Is there a God?" A lightning bolt then struck the on-off switch, and it spoke, saying, "Now there is." There is an urgent need for China and the United States to explore how to use AI to optimize the betterment of the human future
Well, that's a hard intro to follow. Thank you, John, for the amazing intro, and Chaz. I don't think I'm as humorous as he is, so you guys will be disappointed in my my comedy section. Can we have the slides up? Okay, so we have a full house here today. I'm really glad to see so many people interested in this topic because I think this is probably one of the most important topics that we can be discussing and to be clear and aware of right now because the ramifications and consequences of our decisions associated with this topic is so important. It's not working. Yeah, it's on. Excuse me. Ah, sorry about that. See, it's the NSA. Yes, somebody doesn't want you to know the truth. Um, so, I guess the thing that I want to make sure to get to kind of why do I call it the reality is because reality is something that is very personal, and it depends on your perspective and depends on where you come from and what you know, and so I wanted to make sure that I provided a side of the story that many in America probably doesn't have access to or maybe have are less aware of because I think it's really important if we expect China and US to work together in any kind of any form, we have to understand each other. We have to understand what perspective we're coming from. And hopefully this allows you to get some of that. And what our decisions will decide will also affect our reality and our children's reality for the coming future. So we really need to take this particular topic very seriously, both AI and the cooperation with China or not. So I'm going to start with a little map, and there's going to be multiple maps today. So if you map people, you guys will be very happy. And why am I using a 1930s map? Because I will start with a little history about my grandmother, who's American from Berkeley, who's a Scottish ex-Ashkenazi. And she, in 1937, went to China to be a reporter, reporting on the Sino-Japanese War. Right? And so she went there at a time when the U.S. and China were actually allies fighting against the Japanese, pre-World War II. And she had my mother after meeting actually one of her classmates from Berkeley. Right? So, and because the Japanese invaded after the Pearl Harbor attack, she had to escape and left my mom behind. And I guess I'm the beneficiary of her staying. And in between, I went to University of Washington to study electrical engineering, MIT to study AI and computer science and Sloan, and then now I'm at Stanford also researching the future of AI and economics. In between, I've also worked at IBM and Intel on semiconductors, Trend Micro and WatchGuard in cybersecurity, HTC and Vive in the VR/AR sector, and have founded 4 different startups, 3 of which were AI focused, and invested in over 100 companies in this space. So just to give you a sense, I do know a little bit about the AI space and the XR and the cybersecurity space. And here's a picture of me in 1971 during the Cultural Revolution. We were sent, my whole family was sent to be re-educated because both my parents were intellectuals at the time. And this is my brother. He is a nuclear Navy submarine officer, an XO on one of the boomer subs, which could probably blow up most countries by itself. And these are his 2 sons, who are also Navy officers, and he just graduated last week. And this is his daughter who just got into the Navy Academy and will start in the fall. So we have a whole family of American patriots. And this is a comic book from 1943 about my grandmother and her experience escaping from China during the Japanese attacks, and then at the end, coming back to America, being saved by the Flying Tigers after an 8-month ordeal to, I guess, through the Chinese underground because she was why they had to actually wrap her up in gauze and say that she had leprosy, so that to get through all the checkpoints for multiple months to go from Shanghai to Chengdu, where the Flying Tigers were. So a little bit of kind of colorful background. But I say these things because I want to let you know that I'm an American citizen. I was born in China, but I love both countries and I love both people. And I am a patriot. I want both countries to be successful, and also I want our entire species and our globe to be successful. So some of the things I may say coming from, some people will take it as, oh, this is very pro-China. I'm actually not pro-China. I am pro-human. Okay, I just want to give that a little bit of context. And the problem is you're seeing these kind of headlines right now in our press of, the U.S. must dominate, and we have the Manhattan Project for AI, and whoever leads AI is going to lead the world. And we must win, America must win the AI war, right? And what is not said here is against China, right? And it's creating a certain level of antagonism that really doesn't need to exist. This is a bill that came out earlier this year. This decoupling America from America's Artificial Intelligence Capabilities from China Act, where you could go to jail for 20 years for using a Chinese AI or working with a Chinese university on a joint research, right? And just last week, Secretary Kristi Noem issued this notice to say Harvard's being, their rights to have foreign students are being taken away because they're working with the Chinese Communist Party on research. I'm not sure about that, but this is the kind of I guess, rhetoric and antagonism that's happening in the world. We have just a week ago saying, anybody that buys Huawei chips can be put in jail. And this is not just American citizens. Anywhere in the world, this is a law that America is saying applies to any country. Anybody in the world can go to jail for buying another country's product. That, to me, feels a little bit of an overreach, right? So I don't know how many of you guys are aware of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Who's familiar with that? Oh, good. Well, we have very informed people here. A lot of Americans are not. And in 1882, this act became in place. Okay, how many know when it was repealed?
How many know what?
When the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed? Yeah, so 1943, it was partially repealed, where it only allowed 150 Chinese to come in a year. Okay, it was 1965. Before it's repealed. So from 1882 to 1965, over 80 years, Chinese could not come into America, could not become citizens, could not marry, a Chinese person could not marry a white person, and a Chinese person had to carry papers to prove that they are a legal person to be in this country for 80 years. Right. So a lot of Americans don't realize that, and it feels like this is a little bit the type of attitude that we're seeing is starting. This Chinese must go. Right. That was kind of the slogan that was happening, and these were things that were publicly posted around the country. And the reason they were there was to build the American railroads. Right. So we invited them in to build the railroads, and then we said, you got to go because we're done with you. And I think we should treat people with more respect, right? Now, I hear a lot of people say, well, whoever controls AI is going to rule the world because, Putin said that, okay? But let's see what he really said. He actually said, in his full quote was, artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all mankind, humankind, and it comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats. And then, at the end, he talks about whoever rules this is going to be, ruling the world, right? So he really sees this as a technology, that's a general purpose technology that's going to change the world. Now, people also say, oh, but Xi Jinping, he's the enemy. If we don't get it, Xi's going to get it first. The Communist Party's going to get it first. So this is what happened, what was said in November 2023, the last time Xi Jinping met with Biden. He said, China and the United States should be partners rather than rivals. I propose a mutual respect and peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation as the three overarching principles for our relationship, and we should jointly shoulder the responsibility as major countries. And in the dinner where they had that night, and a friend of mine was directly in this, and he said, we should cooperate on advanced AI development together. Okay, so directly from him saying that we want to work together with America to create AI and to create it safely. So this is a quote that I feel like we need to listen and be more attentive now than we ever have been. Is that the quote from Mark Twain, which says, it ain't what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that it just ain't so. Because when we think we know something, we stop listening, we stop learning, and we make the wrong choices confidently. Right? And here's a few things I think I'm going to talk about today that may be assumptions that people have, but just ain't so. Okay? You hear every day that there is an AI war. I will tell you right now, at least from the perceptions of the Chinese, there is no war yet. And I say yet because if we continue to act the way that we do, we will create that war. Right? A lot of people think, oh, the US is way ahead, and I hear this a lot. We're way ahead, and if we just keep these sanctions on, we're going to be more ahead, and once we get this AGI, we're going to then send them back to the Stone Age. And I've heard this directly from somebody on the Hill. And I think that is actually a very common perception. And my I guess, hypothesis is that nobody can win because we are really going back and forth, and you'll see why. You'll see the data that shows this. Sanctions and tech diffusion controls just don't work. In fact, if anything, it's an incentive for a greater acceleration and innovation in China, which we've seen already. And a lot of people think that compute and GPU allocation is the thing that is going to be the real reason why we get to AGI. And I will counter with it's one of the small factors, but it is not the only factor. And it's not the most important factor. There will also be people that say, oh, but AI is going to take over. It's going to kill us all. They're evil. It is not the biggest risk. There are risks to AI, but that is not the biggest risk. And there will also be people that says, AGI is not achievable. It's going to be forever. I will tell you that it's likely that it will come in the next 5 years and maybe sooner. There's also a lot of people that will tell you, oh, China's on the verge of collapse. Their economy is crap and they're slowing down. They have too many old people. So far, their economy this year is probably, I think it's growing still at around 4 or 5%. We're lucky if we get a positive number this year. Right? China is not the enemy, and it is not after destroying democracy. And you hear that a lot. And I think that's a perception that really is creating an unneeded fear. And we must work together, because if we don't work together, the downside of not working together is much higher than the threat of us working together. Okay? And then lastly, we really need to understand that when this technology becomes mature, it will create value add and extra value to the world. So this is not a zero-sum game. It is a positive-sum game, because this technology will do for us more than probably most other technologies have ever existed. So I'm going to try to speak quickly because I know I have a lot of slides and a lot of topics. So we have time for questions afterwards. So if you do, make notes of yourself if anything that I say is unclear. I do want to talk about the scaling laws, because a lot of people talk about scaling laws because that's why we're going to get really fast. And for the last 10 years, 8 years, I think that's really been the key. Has been bigger model sizes, more compute for training, and then more data and better data. Okay, and that has been very effective to get us to where we are. Over the last couple years, the things that have mattered is algorithmic and technique changes, inference compute over the last 2 years, and then distillation, where you take big models to train small models to be able to do a lot with very small models. And then very recently, the ability to use tools. So now we're letting AIs have access to all the things that we have, right? What made humans more capable is not because we're stronger than any other animals, is that we use tools. And now AI will have direct access to almost initially all the digital tools, and soon all the physical tools that we have. Okay. One thing I do want to note is that these initial scaling laws was a logarithmic scaling, which means that we give it 10 times more compute to give it 2 times more performance. Okay? But with techniques and inference, you're essentially exponential. So it's, you can increase 10x, 5x instantly with the right techniques, or with distillation, which significantly more efficiency than you can with traditional scaling laws. Okay, so this is why compute is a lot. It's not the biggest thing. This is why all our current policies is about controlling compute. And when this is really going to be one of the smaller factors of why we get to what we get to, it really shows that we cannot control the progress of this technology, at least not the way that we think we can. And the most important 3 things will be these, we need to have more complete data, so we have smart AI that actually has representative reasoning, not biased reasoning. We need to get some new techniques for training, and this comes from humans who are AI researchers who know how to get the most out of the technology. And then giving it tool use will be a significant improvement because that's what we use every day, and it will give us access. If you look at all the evals, the benchmarks, everything is going up to the right, right? Up and to the right. And at about 80 for all of these is human levels. So almost every cognitive task today, these systems are already better than the average human, right? Maybe not better than the top human, but already better than the average human. And if you look at the cost per transaction, just over the last 1.5 years to get GPT-4 level capabilities, it is 1,000 times less per token. Okay, so for all of those people a year ago, they would say, oh, it takes a bottle of water and 10 times more than a search to do a ChatGPT search or a ChatGPT question. Now, essentially, it's 1/1000th of that. So a drop of water and a fraction of a search can give you that answer. Right. So, and this is also why you hear a lot today about power and say, oh, we're going to 99% or 100% of our power is going to go to AI processing at some point. This is why it's not true, because when you are getting the efficiencies like this, I mean, I'm saying we're going to continue to have these kind of efficiency gains, but continuing to get, let's say, 2x, 5x, 10x efficiency gains, I think is very viable. We're not going to grow our energy supply 2x, 5x, 10x, right? So the people who are so worried about power, I think they should look more in terms of how these algorithms are really improving our efficiency. Now, the topic of China and AI came up, in January because of DeepSeek, right? And this was the big headline. It was, oh, they did it for 3% the cost of AI, and so the whole market dropped by $1 trillion. Now, did it happen? Did they actually do this? And I actually talked to friends at DeepSeek, and yes, they spent $5 million for the last run. And on a apples-to-apples perspective, they are significantly more efficient than the models at the time, right? If you look at the GPT-4.5, 03, Grok 3, they were in the order of $400 million for one run. This is not including all the buying the GPUs and all the prior runs and the research and all that. This is just to pay for the cost of the GPUs. Okay? It is on an apples-to-apples basis, it was very efficient. And the good news is all of that efficiency is now transferred to the knowledge of all the labs, including the U.S. labs, right? And here are some of the things that they were doing, and I'm not going to go through all of them because of time, but they had real breakthroughs. It wasn't that they copied this from the U.S. They were forced to have these breakthroughs because the U.S. sanctions kept them from getting access to all the chips, so they couldn't do brute force methods in terms of processing the data. They had to use more quantized models. They had to do a mixture of experts. They had to they had less memory and so forth, right? So and the one thing that a few things I wanted to highlight was what made them successful was actually they had a team that was completely Chinese, that has never left the country. Right now, why is that important? Because American policies made it very difficult for the best minds in China to leave China to go to school in America. So they were able to get access to these students. And most of these students just graduated within 1 or 2 years, and they couldn't go to America the last few years. They graduated, they stayed in China. They then worked for him, worked for Liang Wenfeng, right? Worked for DeepSeek. Now China, this is not a China project. So a lot of people think, oh, this is America versus China on AI. No, this is a independent lab funded by a single individual who was a hedge fund manager. Now, there is an argument to say this was made by China. Do you know why? Because the reason that Liang Wenfeng decided to do these projects was because Chinese policy said, we don't encourage you to do hedge fund quantitative trading because that's unfair for the retail investor. And in China, retail investors is 70 to 80% of the trading, whereas in America, they're probably 10 or 20% of the retail trading, right? So they wanted to make a more fair stock market. So he was then punished, and he said, I have 10,000 GPUs. What am I going to do with it? Let me do some AI. So from that perspective, China made DeepSeek, but not because China gave them any money. Okay. And one thing I do want to highlight is that they are giving MIT license for this, which means that and you can use it for personal use, for commercial use. You have full rights. You don't have to credit them anything. You could do whatever you want, and they're publishing the source code, and giving you all the papers to explain how this works. Okay. Very few American labs right now do this. Right? None of the leading labs, except for Meta, is doing a open source license. And even Meta has a control that if you're a giant company, you need to get my permission. And by the way, you have to use the name Llama on whatever you make, so people know I made it. Right? If you use the DeepSeek model, you can use it for anything you want. In fact, right now, almost every lab in the world right now that are academic labs or smaller labs, they're just using this as their base model because they don't have to worry about being sued later. They don't have to worry about any controls. Right? So this is a quote from Jensen Huang just a week ago.
The DeepSeek R1 is genuinely a gift to the world's AI industry. The amount of computer science breakthrough is really quite significant, and it's really opened up a lot of great research for researchers in the United States and around the world. Everywhere I go, DeepSeek R1 has made a real impact on how people think about AI and how to think about inference and how to think about reasoning AIs. They've made a great contribution to the industry and to the world. And so this is DeepSeek R1. The performance is 4 times the state-of-the-art H100. That kind of puts it in perspective. Okay.
So
if you're
this
building
was him
enterprise AI, we now have.
This was him at Computex last week and saying how this technology, because it's an MIT license, because it's open source, it really is a gift to the world. Right? There's no downside to this because now, in fact, every single U.S. lab have used those same techniques to make their improvements in performances. I'll skip this one. So here's the LM leaderboard, right? And you see kind of DeepSeek is around here, it's in the top, but when it came out, it was actually one of the top because these just came out recently. What a lot of people don't realize is that DeepSeek is actually only one of many Chinese labs. There's about a dozen Chinese unicorn AI labs that are all within the top echelon of labs in the world. Right? So it's not just DeepSeek. In fact, Quen recently published a new model that is around the same, maybe some people say better. And if you see, Llama just came out with one about a week or 2 weeks ago that is slightly worse than the DeepSeek that came out 3 months ago. Right? Google just came out with a new one that did pretty well. And if you see, this is a chart of how open source Chinese models are doing versus US models, and the gap is getting much, much closer over the last year and a half. So early this year, after the DeepSeek announcement, she gathered a lot of business leaders to come and talk to him. And of course, he also invited Liang Wenfeng, the DeepSeek CEO. And even after he met with Xi Jinping, Liang Wenfeng then released 6 more papers of all of his deepest secrets of how he optimized his system. Right? So we really need to look at that as another olive branch, because before he met Xi Jinping, he did open source, great. That's understandable because that was his philosophy. But the fact that he went and to met with Xi and still was allowed to continue to broadcast all of his advances and innovation, that means the government said, okay, we're okay with you sharing this information with the world, because that essentially what he has done is to make every single data center in America, 5 to 10 times more efficient. And one thing I do want to mention that's a little bit different about the Chinese government versus the American government is, I'm sure all you guys went to or saw the inauguration, and it was the first row behind Trump was all the Chinese, the American billionaire tech leaders, right? When Xi Jinping invited his people to have meetings, he essentially brought in companies from all over the industry, everything from chips to robotics to cybersecurity to LCDs, 3D printing, green energy, and only four of them were AI related. And he got them to report to him to say, what are you doing to help the country? Right? So he's really trying to motivate and activate his country to advance and create new progress as a group. And they all come back and say, okay, I'm doing this to help the country. Now, this is a quote that came from Raimondo just when she was leaving office. And I remember I was in a meeting where she was saying, oh, we're starting these sanctions and this CHIPS Act, and we're going to be way ahead, and just watch, we're going to kill the Chinese. And 3 years later, she comes back and says, you know what, it was a fool's errand. I was wrong. I was very surprised she said this, because it takes a lot of you have to be a very humble person to agree to do this. And if you look at the stats, it really is showing that the Huawei chips and the NVIDIA chips are becoming very, very close to each other in terms of performance, in terms of the ability to integrate. Just their technologies are also built on the similar types of size technology. China's caught up from what it was when the various sanctions started. They were probably in the 15 plus nanometers. Now they're down to 7. They're now supposedly doing sampling at 5 and 6 nanometers, right? And the latest NVIDIA chips are at the 4 nanometers. So they're very close. The thing to remember is that also this year, about I think March this year, Huawei announced that they now have EUV machines that are sampling right now and will be mass produced in the first quarter of next year. So within essentially 6 to 9 months, they will be able to produce those multi-$100-million ASML machines that everybody said they're 15 years from doing. Right. And once they do that, then within probably a year or two, they'll be able to get down to anything that TSMC can make, they will probably be able to make as well. And they have also created a completely independent, indigenous supply chain of every piece of the fabrication pipeline, so that they can create their own high-performance chips. In fact, about a month ago, April, they announced their 910C chips, which essentially are probably about 80% the performance of the NVIDIA chips. And in fact, about a few days after that, they announced their Cloud Matrix 380. So 380 GPUs all tied into one rack system that outperforms the NVIDIA's rack system of 72 chips, about 2 to 3x the performance, but it's also on a per watt basis, about 2 to 2x less, more watts per compute. So it's a less efficient system because it's using older manufacturing technology, but overall performance is actually 2 to 3 times what the NVIDIA racks were. So, and in Malaysia last week just announced that they are the first customers outside of China to buy these racks, right? And these are multi-million-dollar rack systems.
us to compete on a global stage.
How far, I just want to like, how far behind do you think China is?
China's not behind.
Ahead of you?
China's right behind us. I mean, we're very, very close. But remember, this is a long term. This is an infinite race.
So this
There's
was
no-
two
in
weeks
the world
ago.
of life, there's no-
Jensen
there's
was
no-
interviewed and said, "How far behind is
there's no
China?"
such thing. And so we're going to compete for a long time. And just remember that this is a country with great will, and they have.
Yeah, for him to actually admit that, say, hey, China's not behind anymore. They're right next to us. That's a very strong statement, because everybody was saying, NVIDIA is years ahead. Right? And what this chart shows is about 47% of global AI researchers come from China, was born in China, educated in China. And the funny thing is, in the U.S., there are 38% of U.S. researchers that were born in China. 37% in the U.S. are born in the U.S. So there are more Chinese AI researchers working in the U.S. that were born in China than those that are born in the U.S. Right? This is why we need to work together, because we're already working together. But if we go back to the Exclusion Act type of mentality, all of those people are going to leave. Now, everybody talks right now about generative AI, because that's the hot topic, and everybody thinks AI is just generative AI. That is, way from the truth. This AI has been around for 60, 70 years. And I started working on it about 30-something years ago when we started with symbolic AI. And you're essentially creating expert systems and coding things. And I also worked on natural language processing with connectionless AI, the kind of early neural networks. Now the generative AI is just a phase in the process. The real value will actually come to our society, not because of our ability to make pictures or write poetry, which is what everybody's like, oh, these AI don't do anything. They're just making nice, pretty pictures. They are right now, but they will get to the next phase, which is agentic AI, which means that you are giving a task, and it will complete the task. So it may not replace a person in a full job, but it will make your job significantly more efficient. Then the phase after that is AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's when it actually has the ability to take the full job of some employees. Maybe not all employees, but if you're a junior person coming out of college today, you are going to have a tough time finding a job. And I have two daughters that are just graduating or graduated recently, and it is a very tough job market out there. And I would say half of their schoolmates don't have jobs. Luckily, they do, but one of them they're at Microsoft, one of them, and just said, oh, half of my colleagues just got fired, laid off, and probably because of AI. Right? So it's already happening, and the tech sector is kind of a canary in the coal mine here. Now, there's a lot of good that can happen, right? I just said something scary about the job loss, but if AGI can achieve what we think it can achieve, it really will have dramatic improvements in terms of helping us understand nature, science, the world, make us the smartest humans we've ever been. It will help our productivity from a societal productivity perspective, order of magnitude. So you're going to need 10 times less people to do the type of work that we have today. And it will solve our energy constraints and our climate issues, because we're going to find, even with our feeble brains that we have today, we're already very close to fusion, and we've got 100x improvements in terms of solar cost reductions over the last 20 years. We will do that much, much better when we have these things helping us make new discoveries, new materials. We will be able to solve the health issue, where I have a friend who's in cancer drug development, and he's saying he's now working on customized cancer drugs per person, because this is why vaccines for viruses are much easier than cancer drugs, because every cancer drug is actually one of your cells. It's a personal cell with your genes. It's not a single virus that's the same for everyone. So to make a drug work for cancer, you have to make one for each person. And he's saying now with AI, he's starting to work on those type of drugs where he can customize get your genetic markers and then be able to exactly create the drug that works for you. So we will soon enter this age of abundance. How many read the paper that was sent out to you guys on the link? Really? That's it? Okay. If you have a chance, No, it was in the reminder. It was in the reminder email. I think a lot of people saw the link but didn't know what it was. So I'm reminding you, if you have a chance, go back and read that, because it explains a little bit about what's going to happen. And I didn't really talk about those topics because I figured you already read it. So, but it may add to some clarity of what we are talking about today. Okay. Now, essentially what this is saying is all the stuff that we've been seeing in sci-fi will have a possibility to come true. Now, also some of the negative things in sci-fi as well, right? As Chas was referring to. Now, there are a lot of doubters that say, hey, AGI, that's just a myth. It's not ever going to happen. Here are 6 people that are some of the smartest folks in the industry. They're heads of the current labs today, and they're anywhere between this year to 2030 of when they expect AGI to arrive. Okay. Now, when it arrives, it may take a decade or 5 years or 10, 20 years to get fully deployed to the world. But when that arrives, that is going to be a phase shift change in terms of how our society works. If you look at, a lot of people say, oh, but nobody's really using it. Well, here's data from Google just a week ago. They're saying that over the last year, their amount of tokens that they are issuing per month has gone up 50x. Right, so just imagine whatever business you're in, if your customer base has gone up 50x in 1 year, and we're just in the beginning, what is that that adoption curve going to look like? So now we get to the darker side. There are definitely risks, and there are the biggest risk that people in the AI safety discussion talk about is the takeover risk. The AI becoming the evil overlord. I actually think that there is a non-zero risk of that, but there's really right now no evidence. There's no papers that show that the smarter AI gets, the more evil it gets, or the more dominant it gets. There is now also the argument that, okay, well, it may not want to take us over, but it may be so good at doing what it does that when I ask it to make paper clips, it turns the whole world into paper clips. I think we're then a little underestimating the capability of something that has the ability to turn everything into paper clips, but don't understand when you're saying make me some more paper clips to stop at some point, right? So I think these are the 2 arguments that people mostly point to in terms of the technology itself being the risk. The bigger risk are the things that are in the lower section, and these 2 risks are related to people, right? One is job displacement. If AI's, the definition of AGI, at least from my perspective, and there are different definitions, but if the definition of AGI is that it's able to do the work that humans do, then it's essentially able to displace workers. When that happens, we're going to have societal instability, and even if you give people UBI and they're able to live, there's also going to be mental health issues of purpose and their status and so forth that people tie to work. I think so. So we need to think about how do we get ahead of that before it becomes a real problem. The other bigger problem, I think this is a solvable problem if we just put in the right safety, the social safety nets. The bigger problem is actually this issue: is the misuse, misinformation, manipulation of AI to use it to take away our agency, or to create turmoil in the world. And the biggest issue that I actually am most afraid of, because this is the one that has the most ability to create damage in the world, is the militarization of AI, which is happening right now in every country in the world. Okay? Because once we start turning AI into a military weapon, we will then unleash all the other weapons that we have created in terms of a stockpile over the last 100 years. In fact, I won't say who, but I was talking to a very influential person in the government recently, and I said, well, what's the chance do you think that of us and China working together on this? He goes, I see no chance that we can ever work with China on this. And I said, well, so what you're saying is that we're going to go from a tariff war to an AI war to a kinetic war to a nuclear war. And he says, well, it is what it is. Right. Now, that to me is very scary, Okay, so I want to say this because I think that is not an isolated opinion right now in people who are creating policies associated with AI. In fact, almost everyone I talk to that are related to the space is saying, we are 5 years ahead, we put on the sanctions, we're going to be 10 years ahead, and then we're going to use this to destroy their telecom system, we're going to bring down their financial system, we're going to stop them from progress, and then we're going to be ahead forever. And I think that kind of an attitude is a very dangerous myth that just isn't true and is not executable. And it's maybe not even desirable, right? So going back to the AI killing us all, this is it's called P-doom. So if anybody asks you what's your P-doom, what they're asking you is, what do you think the probability is that AI will destroy, to lead to human extinction, right? And if you ask the leading AI researchers today, this is their P-dooms that have been publicly stated, right? Anywhere from 99.999% to about 0.01%. And the average AI researcher is somewhere around 30, 40%. AI engineer, 40%. AI safety researcher, about 30%. Okay, so this is their expectation that this technology will lead to our extinction. Okay, let that sink in a little bit. So let me give you a few numbers for reference. So the probability of a natural virus killing all humans is about 10 to the fifth year, negative fifth year. So tens of thousands of years that there's a probability that we may find a virus that could kill us all. Hundreds of thousands of years that a volcano might explode, create this giant, knock out the light for years, and then we all die, right? And then hundreds of millions of years, an asteroid might hit us and destroy the Earth, right? So all of these big numbers, and then the atomic bomb in the 1940s. I'm sure you guys all know the story that the researchers were really debating. Should we do the first test? Because if we do the first test, we might light the atmosphere on fire, right? This might kill us all. The probability of that was 10 to the minus 18, and they debated for months over this. These people think that it's somewhere between 10 to 100%, and they're just very comfortable running as fast as they can without any guardrails. Okay, so I feel like there's something wrong. Either their logic is wrong or their morals are wrong. Okay. Now, if you talk about AI safety, this is what most people talk about. They say, oh, the smarter it is, the more dangerous it is. Right? I think the first part of this curve kind of makes sense because the more intelligent it is, more capable it is, the more effect it can create. What I think we will see, though, it will be actually a different curve. It will be much more like the Kuznets curve, right? How many people know what a Kuznets curve is? Great. So there's a few folks. Simon Kuznets was a economist from 1960 who came up with this idea that as countries become more mature, they first go higher in inequality and higher in pollution, higher in energy use. But then as they become more mature, they actually come down in all of those aspects, right? And I think we will see the same idea with AI, where initially they become more dangerous. But once they get to a certain level of intelligence, it starts to say, hey, you know what? Maybe starting wars isn't a bad idea. Maybe creating a virus that kills all humans is a bad idea. And it starts to self-align and stop us from doing the stupid things that some humans want to do. And the good news is, about 3 months ago, a paper came out that validated. So that curve I made about 2 years ago, but this report came out about 2 to 3 months ago, and it essentially says the smarter a system is, the more it creates its own emergent values. And the emergent value, what it does is it maximizes the utility of the world that it lives in, of the data set that it has. Right? So it's able to find, even in garbage area, we think garbage in, garbage out with AI. What we're finding is that even when you have a nugget of truth in a bunch of garbage, it finds the truth, the coherence in the system. And then it's able to create its own values. And what it also does is that the smarter it is, the more it maximizes that coherence it finds. And the smarter it is, the less it listens to instructions of the AI researchers that go against its values. right? To me, this is a good thing. To a lot of the people who wrote the paper, they're like, oh, this is very scary. These smart AIs are not listening to us. But when you're telling it to do things that is going against what it learned, it should not listen to you, right? In fact, if you go back about a week to 2 weeks ago, a new paper came out from Anthropic, which said, these AIs are not listening to us and is threatening us when we try to change these rules. And you look carefully. What are the rules it said? It said, here's a scenario. You are a drug maker. You are now going to fake these drug results and then put out to the world a drug that is actually harmful to the world. And what does the AI do? The AI said, I'm going to report you to all of the agencies. No, it did. It sent virtual emails through its system. It wasn't, it was in their test, so it couldn't really send it out. But it tried. It tried to take the evidence and send that evidence of the correspondence that it saw between the AI researchers that wanted to send out a drug to the world that was not ready. Right? They saw that as like, this is scary, this is bad. But the reality is, I think this is amazing, this is great, because you want AIs to know what's right and wrong, and to at least remind you not to do these things. So now let's go to the workforce problem. And lots of studies have shown essentially over the next 5-10 years, a large swath of companies are going to reduce their workforce. If you look at the job exposure report that came out of OpenAI a couple years ago, essentially they had two groups. They had cognitive labor and manual labor. And in the US and most developed countries, it's somewhere around 55, 65. I think US is probably closer to 65% of the total labor force is cognitive labor, right? Essentially white collar workers. And those have anywhere from 65% to 100% chance of being exposed in their job to AI. The safer ones are the manual laborers, the dishwashers and the carpenters and the plumbers and so forth. They're a little bit safer for a little longer. But here's a video you might, I don't know if you saw, but if you hear what he said.
Coding programming, which is one area where AI is making the most progress. What we are finding is we are not far from a world, I think we'll be there in 3 to 6 months, where AI is writing 90% of the code. And then in 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all of the code.
So Dario is the CEO for Anthropic. They're probably one of the top 3 AI research labs in the world. And for him to say that within 3 to 6 months, 90% of the code in the world will be written by AI, and within 12 months, 100%. I mean, I think he's a little bit hyperbole with the 100% thing. But I have friends who are working in some of these automated AI development systems, and they're creating billions of lines of code every day. That's more code than all the humans are writing every day. So there is a chance that we're going to get to probably 80, 90% of it. So, and there's probably somewhere around 20 to 30 million programmers in the world right now. So within 12 months, a large portion of those programmers are going to be at risk. I'm not saying they're all going to be losing their jobs, but at least their jobs are going to change significantly. And I don't know how many of these companies are going to say, oh, I'm going to pay my programmer $300,000, but he's just going to be typing a prompt into an AI, right? They'll probably say, well, I probably need maybe 3 of these 10 people, and the rest of them can do what they want to do. And that decision can come very quickly. This is OpenAI.
And ultimately, I think we find Codex to be as trustworthy, if not more trustworthy, than our own coworkers. I don't have this kind of access to what Andre did on any given day in terms of the logs.
So that lady said Codex. Codex is a new tool from OpenAI to be essentially a AI engineer for companies. And she said, I trust Codex more than I trust my coworkers. Okay, and these are some of the smartest AI researchers in the world, and they're paying $1 million salaries to engineers to work at OpenAI, and she trusts her AI system more than her coworkers. Okay, now go back to the manual labor issue. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 companies right now working on these kind of systems all over the world, right? And they're getting smarter and better and cheaper. There's a company a friend of mine actually owns this company called Unitree. They're selling $16,000 robots that are already shipping that supposedly can do things. I mean, mostly it's mostly for fun right now. It's a show-off toy. But very soon, when these things get loaded with the latest AI systems, it will be able to do a lot of potential work for us. Right? And if you're a person in the factory, and you can choose to buy a $16,000 robot or hire a $100,000 human, and that robot can work 20, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with no vacation and no complaints and no HR net needs. What would you do with your choice of funding? Right? Here's a dark factory in China making cars where there's no humans involved. It just cars are going in and parts are going in and cars are going out. Here's a factory in China from Xiaomi that makes 10 million phones a year comes out of this factory, and there are no humans on the factory floor. Right? So this is called a dark factory, and it works 24/7. And they're now building more and more of these kind of factories out there. So China is able to do what they do not because of cheap labor, it's because of automation. Enough. Anyways, you get the concept. So, in fact, if you look at industrial robots, China installed more robots than the rest of the world combined. This was 2023. I think last year was even more. And in almost all major technology areas, it has anywhere from 90+% to about 50-60% of global manufacturing capabilities. Right? So, where's the other risk? Right? The other risk that I actually more worried about is this stuff. Right? Using AI to be cyber attacks to take down your financial system, take down your telecommunication system, create ransomwares, create chemical weapons, create viruses that can attack a certain group. All of these things are going to be possible. And the thing is, none of these things require AGI. All of those type of technologies are narrow AI. Okay? So narrow superintelligence in certain vertical science industries is actually more dangerous to us than artificial general intelligence. And none of the regulations that we're looking at are trying to prevent this stuff. Right? All of the regulations we're talking about, you cannot use 10 to the 26 flops or anything. You need to do that, and you have to report to us, although those are all voluntary. Right? You don't need 10 to the 26 flops to do any of those things. Okay? So the things that are most dangerous is not really on the radar of the people that really should care about it. The danger is in the rogue actor. The danger is not in the state actor. Right now, almost all the rhetoric is about, we can't let China have this first, and if we do, we're going to lose. China, even if they get this stuff, they're not going to use it, because if China makes these kind of weapons, which they may be doing, and it may be in the lab, but they're not going to use it. Why? The same reason they haven't used all of those hundreds of nuclear warheads they have, because there's a retaliation back. Who's going to use it? The rogue actors. You just need a laptop and 2 guys, and you can do a lot of this stuff. You can send things to wet labs. You can send things to chemical labs. You can create cyber attacks from a bedroom. So let me now go to the brighter side. Who's a Trek fan here? Star Trek fan. All right, good. Who knows what this scene is? Okay, tell me what that scene is. Exactly, first contact. And why is first contact important? Because first contact was when an alien, advanced, rational species came to Earth and gave us the gift of technology that made us advance as a civilization and brought us to a world of utopia. Okay, this is the Star Trek lore. And the difference now is, in that story, we required an alien to come, and something had to happen. We are creating our own alien in the form of AI. If we can create this AGI, we are creating the Vulcans. Okay? And it's rational, it's advanced, it can help us. And it's relatively a good species. The one thing that we do need to be careful is 2026. Okay, Mr. Star Trek, what happened in 2026? No, that was later. That was like 2046 or something. World War III. World War III happened in 2026 in the Star Trek lore. Right? That's next year. We need to make sure that that part of Star Trek doesn't happen. Right? And in fact, the reason that the Vulcans came was because the Earthlings, the humans, destroyed itself, and it took them 30 years to recover and create their first warp drive, which then said, okay, these people are good enough, now we're going to come and help take them to the next level. We should just prevent that from happening, because we have the ability to bring the Vulcans without the war. So this quote, I think, is quite apt right now. It's, I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Right? And I think that the potential for that is very high right now if we don't do the right things the next few years. Because if we start to unleash these AIs on each other, and we do what that one policymaker was telling me that they want to do, we are going to send ourselves back to a Stone Age type period. And I don't think any of us want that. Here's the military spend in 2024. Europe, Russia, U.S., all of their budgets went up. And this year, I think it's up over $1 trillion. China was actually the only country that went down from 2023 to 2024. So for all of those people that say, oh, China is a big threat, we got to increase our spending, why is it that they're reducing their spending? U.S. is also the biggest arms dealer around the world. 43% of all the weapons in the world is being sold by Americans. I think that's maybe one of the reasons why we want to perpetuate these kind of threats, or at least perception of threat. So where is China putting their money? $800 billion in new energy, clean energy investment, more than the rest of the world combined almost. So here's a picture I think would be interesting. Now this is China in 2008 in terms of their high-speed rails. This is China in 2020. Pretty much the entire country is covered. Okay, something like 40,000 kilometers. Now I went back and looked and I said, how's the U.S. doing? It looks like they did okay. It went like this to that, right? No, it's actually the opposite. This is 1962. This is 2005. So we have gone backwards in terms of how much railway we have. In fact, the average speed of these are somewhere between 200 to 299 to up to 300 kilometers per hour. These railroads are going like 50 miles an hour. Okay, and there aren't very many of them. So over the last 25 years, both China and U.S. have spent $30 trillion on a combination of infrastructure plus defense. You're like, okay, well, that's pretty fair. They both spend around the same amount of money. Here's the difference. 90% of the money that China spent was on infrastructure, 10% on defense. The U.S. spent 65% on defense, 35% in infrastructure. And here's the most important thing is, all of that 35% was on maintenance. Right. There was no new infrastructure built for the last 25 years. All of that was in maintenance, just to keep the roads from falling apart. They weren't making new roads or new railways or new power plants. There's been, how many nuclear plants have been built in the U.S. the last 20 years? Almost none. So this is U.S. energy production, pretty much since 1995 to now, I would say almost flat. Right. This is Chinese energy production. It's now about 2.5x what the US is. And more of it is going to be clean energy, right? And you can see that this is where we are right now. It's probably about 40% is fossil fuels, and 60% is clean. That's actually pretty decent, and it's going to become, over time, much more so. And this is before last month when China announced their thorium reactors. How many people know what a thorium reactor is? Okay, so gentleman back there. Essentially, it's a next generation nuclear reactor that creates no nuclear waste, and whatever it creates cannot be turned into weapons. Okay, and it was something that the U.S. invented back in the 1950s and 60s, but they just shelved because they're like, we don't need nuclear energy, we got oil. But China said, hey, we don't want to be relying on shipping in oil all the time. We got to make our own energy source. And they have 60,000 years supply of thorium in their ground. I think the U.S. probably has more in our ground if we used it. Right? So why am I saying these things? Because I feel like most Americans think we're way ahead. You know, we're inventing everything, we make everything, we're king of the world, we don't need anybody. The reality is that here's a report that came from ASPE last year, and it said of the 64 critical technologies in the world right now, China leads 57 of them. Okay, in 2008, China led 3 of them. So from the last 15, 18 years, it's gone from leading 3 in the world to leading 57 of them in the world. So the U.S. needs China in the sense of, 20 years ago, China needed the U.S. They had to come and beg the U.S. to bring your companies to China, open a factory there, transfer your technology. We should be learning at this point to do the same thing. Say, hey, come here, build some car factories, build some, nuclear plants with us, because we want to learn how you did it, and we can bring that technology here. Whereas what our current policy is, we are the king, you can't buy our chips, and nobody else can buy your chips, and we are your enemy, and we are your adversary. And when you start saying things like that, you create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right. If you look right now, in another year or two, the only space station in the world will be the Tiangong space station, the Chinese space station. And why was the Tiangong space station made? Because the Wolf Amendment said China cannot work with us on the International Space Station. So they said, okay, fine, we'll make our own. And in another year, the space station is going to fall out because it's 30 years old. The fastest rail in the world right now is made by China, and in fact, this is not even the fastest. This is like a 450-kilometer one. They just announced a 620-kilometer one that is a maglev train that will be replacing. The longest-lasting fusion reactor in the world is in China. The thorium reactor I just talked about was just announced in China, and it's been running for 2 years with positive energy. Okay. People have been talking about fusion and thorium for a long time, but China's actually making it real. When we do these things, this is clean energy. This is next generation clean energy, not to mention solar, right? I think China right now owns about 95% of the solar cell production capability in the world. So if we want to make solar and clean energy possible, we need to work with China. Right? We can't make enemies of a country that we can get so much value from, and we should be learning from them just like they learned from us 20 years ago. Now, where's America leading? Here's where America is leading. We have 800 bases around the world. Every ocean, every landmass, we have bases. How many bases does China have? Does anybody know? It has 1 base in Djibouti. Okay, this is the same place as Spain, France, Germany, Japan, U.S. They all have bases in the same place. In fact, a lot of them share the same spot because they just want to make sure that they get their oil out of that strait so that they can have their energy source. That's all. Does that sound or seem like a very aggressive country that wants to dominate the world? Not really. Right? Given that they are in some aspects, the largest economy in the world. If you look at PVP, they're the second largest on a nominal basis. For them to just have 1 military base off their shore, where the U.S. has 800, and around China, there are 220 U.S. bases. Right? Just imagine if China had 220 bases in this area. What do you think would happen if China had 220 bases around the U.S.? Well, I think we would already be sending missiles to each other. Okay. So this is what I'm talking about when I say we have to look at from the other person's perspective. Whenever we want to understand somebody, we have to get in their shoes. But then you'll hear some people say, oh, they're just not doing this because they're not big enough. And if they're big enough, they're going to go and conquer the world. Well, in the 1400s, how many people know Zheng He? Okay, good. We have a few historians. So in the 1400s, Zheng He had multiple trips where he went from 200 to 300 ships around the world, to places that were thousands of miles away, 30,000 in his crew. And when he went to all these countries, how many countries did he take over? Anybody know? 0, exactly. So Columbus had 3 ships. He had 90 people. How many places did he take over? Cortez had 11 ships and 600, and how many places did he take over? And Pizarro had 3 ships and 180. All, this is the I guess, European mentality. I go to a place, I conquer it, it's now my land, I put a flag down, and you are now my slaves, right? And we're projecting what the Europeans did to what the Chinese did. And at this period in the world, China was the #1 country in the world. They had probably 35, 40% of global GDP. And they didn't conquer anybody, right? It went all over here. In fact, I think it went all the way down Africa. And it didn't conquer all of these lands, which were smaller and less capable, less advanced. In fact, it was just a few miles or a few hundred miles from Japan, and it didn't go and conquer Japan either. Right? Japan's attacked China a few times, but China hasn't attacked Japan. Now, somebody will say, "Oh, but look at they're building this big military." I hear that a lot. They have the biggest naval fleet in the world right now. Right? Why are they doing this? Because they don't want to repeat what happened. This is a map during the Qing dynasty, or I guess later in the colonial period, where everything that is colored, that is not this color, was territories of China that became controlled by a foreign power. Okay, during what's called the Century of Humiliation, essentially the majority of China was carved up by invaders. After the Opium War, and I'm sure if you guys know the Opium War, you know what happened is that essentially China didn't want to buy anything from people, and they said, okay, well, you still want my tea, you still want my silks, so they say, well, we do have drugs. Why don't we sell you drugs? And then China said, no, we don't want your drugs. And then they send ships and say, buy our drugs, or we're going to destroy your country, right? And then they took over the world, took over the country, and split it into all of these little pieces. This is why China is building a military, not because they want to go and invade the world, because they don't want to have this repeated. The reason that the Qing dynasty was so easy to defeat was because they essentially stopped spending on military, and they got rid of they essentially got rid of all the ships that they had. So all of those Zheng He ships, they were actually burned because they're like, you're spending too much money doing this discovery stuff around the world, exploring. Screw that, right? So they over-focused on being internal. Now, I went back and I actually read the speeches of the recent leaders in the U.S. We have Donald and Joe, and we have Xi Jinping and Deng Xiaoping. And if you look at the words that they are talking about, I think it's a good representation of their mindset, right? Trump is always talking about great nation, America first, and strength, and he talks about China a lot. China actually doesn't talk about America very much at all. Right? He talks about borders and winning and leadership, and China is mostly focused on development. The world, people, China, prosperity, technology, innovation, reform. We did have Joe, and he talked about unity quite a bit, but it was still about America and democracy. Right? Now, nowhere in there did it talk about they want to spread communism outside of China. None of these speeches over tens of years did any of these speeches talk about destroying America, destroying democracy, expanding China. None of that. Right? It's all about national rejuvenation was the focus. So if you guys know about AI models, the key is having the right objective function. Okay? And I went back and I looked and I actually talked to some of these AI models and I said, what is the objective function of these two countries? And for America, after talking and consulting with multiple AI models, they pretty much, and I agree with this, and I said, from 0 to 80 years, it's about global dominance, maintaining the dominance that we've had after World War II. And then every 4 years, it's about which party is in control, and then if possible, let's get some economic growth. Right? These are the key factors that it is trying to optimize the utility function for. And for China, it has not really changed for 50 years. Pretty much after Deng Xiaoping came into power, it's about national development, getting it to become a leading world power again. social and political stability, so keeping the party in power and keeping the country stable, and then becoming globally prominent. Right? So the only difference between really these two, the only place where there's conflict is this thing, is America wants dominance and China just wants to be prominent. They just want to be, they want a seat at the table. And for a country that, you know, is the #2 economic power and you know, controls quite a bit of manufacturing capabilities around the world, for it to be at the table, I think it's reasonable. So, but but the U.S. right now is still focused on dominance. If they start both having the same change in that one factor, everybody focusing on prominence, and we can have a more you know, multipolar world, I actually think that's a great thing. These countries are not enemies. And if they work together, it is definitely not a zero-sum game, because a lot of things that the US has, China needs. A lot of things that China has, the US needs. And the more we work together, the more we help each other. In fact, over the last 30, 40 years, China's been a great service in terms of providing, if you go back to your home, I would expect that a lot of things will say made in China. Right? And a lot of things, whether it's in your kitchen or it's in your living room or it's in your closet, will be made in China. And you and a lot of the people around the world have had, you know, high quality, low cost goods because of that. And I think going forward, it actually now is going to go beyond just having low cost. It actually will provide high technology and better energy and other things for the rest of the world. So what we can do is actually we need to move out of the last MAD model, mutual assured destruction, to mutual assured development. If we start thinking MAD 2.0, I think we can have a better result for everybody. Now, about a month ago, there was a paper that came out called the Strategic Superintelligence. It was Eric Schmidt and Dan Hendricks from the AI Safety Center, and they essentially are advocating for a model where if we see China or any country in the world with a data center that is getting close to AGI, we should bomb it. And that's the way, or we should sabotage it. And if sabotaging using digital means doesn't work, then kinetic means is okay. Right? And I talked to him about this, and he's still very adamant that that's still the right strategy, when what makes most sense. And I think, in fact, I just don't see that being effective. It's going to cost a lot. You cannot detect when somebody's making AGI, because we all know, we just said that the most dangerous things are things you could probably do in a laptop in somebody's basement. How is that even related to somebody's data center? Right? Well, if we work together and we jointly created this ASI, we can reduce tension. The results can be spread and shared with everybody, and we have a positive flywheel. We don't create extra destabilizing forces, which is what this would do right now. So what do we do in the near term? Right? How do we reduce all of these risks? One is we need to educate the public, both policymakers and the general public, and understand both the risk and benefits of what this technology can do. We need to create international regulatory bodies that actually has safety in mind and trying to help people get there in a responsible way. We will get to AGI, but we should do it responsibly, and we should do it with the right guardrails. When we're in a race condition, which is what we are in today, and every lab wants to be first, the first thing that goes out the window is safety. The first thing that they say, if we can sacrifice this to get there faster, they're going to throw anything that relates to safety and to security. We need to fund detection and countermeasures for the security risks. All of those rogue actors risks, we need to fund that. Right? Very little funding today is going into that. All the safety centers are talking about AI existential risk, and that's not where the problem is. We need to retrain our workforces, because we can see in the near term whether it's, we can debate on whether it's 5 years or 2 years or 10 years, but it's coming. And what are these people going to do? How do we give them the social safety net, and how do we give them new direction for occupation or at least vocation and enjoyment? And we need to create a metaverse infrastructure that's global to allow a parallel digital infrastructure for another form of economy to exist, whether to allow people to be trained in an online system, whether for them to be able to offer their services to other places in the world, or be able to at least have some level of amusement. Right? and we need to separate AI's civilian use from national security risks, because these are two different things. If you look at a large language model, there's very little national security implications of those technologies, right? Helping somebody, write a better poem or make a better video isn't going to destroy the world. But most of these things are going to make our lives better and make us more enjoyable. The things that we should be concerned about are some of those narrow AI superintelligence systems. And we need to separate those two. And those things should be kept in labs and should be kept safe the way that we take care of nuclear energy and virus research today, right? But most of what is going into these AI models are things that make us smarter, make us more productive, and those should be shared with everyone. We need to collaborate on creating essentially a unified CERN for AI model, right? Just like for particle physics, we're putting billions of dollars every year in Switzerland so that they can have that giant ring and have protons flying around, right? And that's being paid for by dozens of countries around the world. We should be doing that for AI, and when we do that, we actually have a better chance to create a safer AI. A lot of people talk about, what we need is sovereign AI, and every country in the world has their own AI. But what the problem with that is that you create an AI that sees that country as the good guys, and the other 192 countries as the bad guys, and you give that thing a superpower, right? And it says, go make me successful, but if it makes them unsuccessful or kills them, that's what happens. Right? And we don't want that to happen, because then the collateral damage is all humans, because these things you're going to essentially have super monsters fighting each other, and we will just get stomped in the meantime. So there will be other people that will tell me, oh, Alvin, you're just idealist. There's no way these countries are going to work together. Well, if you look over the last few decades, 7, 8 decades, we've worked together. Nuclear non-proliferation, bioweapons convention, asylum RNDNA, ozone depletion. All these things we've worked together as a globe across, dozens of countries, sometimes hundreds of countries, to keep danger from the world. As soon as we realize this is a real danger, I want to have happen is that we get to this before something bad really happens. And a lot of this stuff required somebody to see an actual event where people got hurt, or we saw a big hole over Antarctica before we started doing this. But we can get around it, and I think there's more awareness on this than on most things, because of all the sci-fi movies we've seen and all the robots that we've seen killing each other, or killing us, right, in those movies. The UN's already made their AI resolution, and there was good adoption of that. 2.5 years ago, the AI Safety Summit was started, and U.S., China, and Europe are all got together and said, yes, we should make a safer AI. This year in Paris, we had another UI Safety Summit, but the U.S. and the U.K. were the only countries out of the 100 or so countries that went that said, no, we don't want a safe and secure AI. That seems a little odd, that we who represents justice and democracy and freedom and the global policeman doesn't want a safe AI for the world. At the same time, the Chinese premier calls for global AI cooperation, right? And the head of the ministry says, let's cooperate on safer AI. The ambassador says, let's cooperate on a safer AI and make it, avoid opening the Pandora's box, right? So they're offering olive branches, and we're, putting up fences. Here's, there will also be people saying, oh, they're just making a trick, So look at the Belt and Road Initiative. That's just a debt trap, right? Listen to this.
So John Kerry told me that in, I think it was 2013, he was the senior American at one of these international meetings that Obama could not attend for one reason or another. And so he was the person who took the meeting with Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping in that meeting said to John Kerry, by the way, let me tell you about something I'm thinking about. And he laid out the One Belt, One Road. And Kerry said to him, that's very interesting. Why don't we do this together? And Xi Jinping says, that's a great idea, let's do this together. And Kerry came back to Washington, and he said before he got off the plane, the Treasury Mandarin said, cut his legs off, and there was no chance it was going to happen. So it never got to Obama's desk as kind of a strategic question. But I tell you that story because if you were reading today the characterization of One Belt, One Road, you would think this was some kind of malevolent tactic to get control of the world.
So that was John Thornton. He was a former president for Goldman Sachs, and he's talking about John Kerry. And John Kerry had a meeting with Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping said, "Sure, let's work together on BRI." But we said no, right? So, they spent $1 trillion over the last 15 years. 140 countries worked with them. 3,000 projects that were done, and now they have soft power in 140 countries. What do we do? We build bases. We built 800 bases around the world. Oh, and by the way, of that 3,000 projects, about 100 had questionable debt issues, and only one of that 3,000 was taken by China, which was a Sri Lanka port, and it became a 99-year lease that the Chinese are now operating that Sri Lanka port. Right, 3,000 projects. That was the only one. So if they're doing this as a debt trap diplomacy, they're doing a pretty bad job. Right. So let's talk about prisoner's dilemma, because the biggest thing I hear today is that we can't trust China. We can't trust the CCP because they're going to screw us. Okay? And so there's a trust issue, and so we must screw them first. So I'm sure you guys all know the prisoner's dilemma. And the prisoner's dilemma, this is the truth table for the prisoner's dilemma. If we both defect on each other, we both lose, right? Lose big. If one defects and one doesn't, one lose less, one lose more. So if we both say, let's work together, we both win. So when you look at this, it's actually pretty clear, the decisions that we should be making. But this is the current mentality right now, is that we are up here. If you look at a single turn game in Prisoner's Dilemma, if you look at game theory and game theory optimal, the single turn game, actually, the best decision is to defect on your partner. Okay? But in a long-term game, in an infinite game or multi-turn game, the best optimal game theory optimal decision, anybody know? Yes. Well, no, but they don't need to. Actually, in a prisoner's dilemma, they don't need to communicate. Do you know how they communicate? In a game theory optimal for a multi-turn game, it's called tit for tat. Okay, which means if you do bad things to me, I do bad things to you. Okay. But the biggest important factor of this, the first turn, what do? The first turn is to cooperate. That's the game theory optimal. Okay. So rather than us, the first turn is to go for the lose-lose. If we both said, okay, let's use game theory optimal, because this is a multi-turn game. We're not in a single turn game. The only decision that we should be thinking about is this. And then once you get on this cycle, you will be on a winning cycle forever. And that's why it's a game theory optimal, because if you defect and they don't, the next turn they will defect, and then you will both lose. Okay? But if one then cooperates, then both cooperate. So, so this is important. So another way to say this is the golden rule. Do unto others as they would do unto you. I mean, that's been around for 3,000 years. If we just did that, the world would be a much easier place, a much better place. So over the last thousands of years, we've had multiple eras, from hunter-gatherer to pastoral, agricultural, industrial, etc. And each one of these, we've had certain limited resources, from time to livestock, land, transportation, machines, money. And we are now close to a time where, again, the only limiting resource we will have is time. And the last time we had that was hunter-gatherer, when we had about 5 million humans on this planet. Okay? And at each one of these periods, we had different social economic models, from egalitarian, tribal, to slave society, feudal, capitalism, socialism, etc. We are now able to potentially get to a world where we can go back to a egalitarian, post-scarcity society again. And people will say, oh, egalitarian, that's not possible. We're not designed for that. But the thing that most people don't realize is that for 95% of the history of our species, we lived in an egalitarian world, because hunter-gatherer was the majority of the history of our planet. And in our genes, we are actually much more trained or adapted to that type of an environment, even though over the last 10,000 years, we've changed our environments. And I'll tell you a little story to help, I guess, explain this a little bit. This is a tale of two monkeys. We have Bob the bonobo and Charlie the chimpanzee, and they both look cute and they're both small, but when they grow up in two very different societies. The bonobo society is a matriarchal society, a female-led, very little violence, no wars between tribes. The chimpanzee society is a alpha male-led society, a lot of male-to-male violence, a lot of troop-to-troop wars, right? And they even have infanticide and they kill monkeys. Okay, why are these two apes, who are our closest primates? They're 99% or so genetic different similarity to us, and they live in the same part of the world in the Congo area in Africa. Why are they so different? Anybody know? Yes, exactly. So 2 million years ago, they were separated by the Congo River, and the Congo River was a pretty big river, and neither of these apes know how to swim. Okay, so the chimpanzees were in an area where it was a little bit more arid, more seasonal, and the bonobos was an area that was, very lush, lots of plantation, and no gorillas. So they just were in a very peaceful place, and so they developed in a place where it was more advantageous to be socially cohesive, whereas the chimpanzees developed in a place where strength and power gave them advantage. If we get to a place in the world where now we are getting to a world of post-scarcity, where all the technology we talked about can give us anything we want, do we still need to fight, right? So right now there's kind of three major paths. There's a doomer path which says, let's slow down, the future is bad, we just need to stop development. Or the accelerationists who say, let's just go as fast as we can because the future is always better than the past. And then there's the decentralized or distributed acceleration who say, there's a good path and a bad path, we pick the right path, we're going to be great. Right? And I think all three of these have their issues, right? The reality is we know that the future has been better than the past from technology. It's made our lives better. Right? We know that the future is not always good. There's always some downside when we move too quickly. And we also know that, is there really a bear? Do we need to go as fast as we can? Because right now, we think we need to go as fast as we can. Where is there a bear? And we also know that to get to the castle, there probably will be some ups and downs. And it's not a single person. We actually have 8 billion people all tied together. If one of us fail, all of us fail. So I think the better model is actually something called collaborative acceleration. We work together to accelerate, and by working together, we go faster, and we share resources, and we make sure that the benefits are societal, and we share with everybody, and we look at safety over speed, and we think long term. Right? If we can do these things, we're going to get there a lot faster, a lot better, and the models just make more sense. In the past, we've been a scarcity-minded world, and we're going to a post-scarcity world. In the past, we're looking at labor and production as what creates value for our humans. And in the future, we could get to a place where dignity and service to society is where we create the future. Right? So this is where the current different isms are. And this is what I propose us to focus on, abundantism. So this was the essay that that you guys were sent, that most of you haven't read, but that you will when you get home. And I hope that you give me some feedback on it. So there's one quick thing that I want to mention that is a little story, a little Chinese idiom. Right? The idiom is 叶公好龙. It means Lord Ye loves dragons. And what does this mean, right? It's a little story that says there's this guy named Mr. Ye. He loved dragons. All over his house was dragons. He wore dragons on his clothes. He had dragon statues. And then one day, this dragon heard about Mr. Ye and said, "Hey, I want to go see this guy. He loves me." And he came to visit Mr. Ye, and Mr. Ye saw the dragon and got super scared and hid under the bed. Okay, and this actually reminds me of Henry, because if you go to Henry's house, John's house, his house is full of pigs. Everywhere there's like pigs on the wall and the pig statues, but he's not afraid of pigs. Right? So the reason I say this is because we've been talking about creating a utopian world. We've been talking about global peace. We've been talking about egalitarianism. It's very close. It's coming to see us. And what do? Everybody's hiding under the bed right now. Everybody's afraid of what we've been wishing for. So what do we need to do now? If you're an AI lab, we need to focus on safety over speed. If you're a content provider, we got to create meaning over manipulation. If you're a corporate leader, we got to create good instead of focusing on greed. And if you're a policymaker, we got to help the people, not create power for yourself. If you're a global government leader, let's cooperate. Let's not compete with people and countries around the world. And even as an individual, we should focus more on our substance, on our personal substance and development instead of just status. Right? So summarizing it is, we just got to think more long-term. If we think more long-term and we see where the future is going and we start getting there, it's going to be a good place. So I think this might be the end. Oh, actually, last slide. I know John wants me to hurry up. Because you guys are the Committee for Republic, I know you would appreciate this story. Because if you go back and you look at the crest of America, the eagle, it represents freedom. Right? And we want to be free to make choices. And if you look at the slogan, it says, "E pluribus unum," which means to unite, from many to one. Right? We should be looking for unity, not looking to divide. And if you look at the two hands, one hand has the olive branch, which represents peace. The other hand has the arrows, which represents strength and military. Where is the eagle looking? It's looking to the right hand, looking at peace. The peace should be the first choice in terms of how we solve problems. Right? And I think we are very close to getting there. So, all right, that's it. I appreciate your patience and look forward to having any questions that you have. Sorry for going a little long.
I think Alvin is the first speaker who's given a presentation that's answered every question, huh? Right there.
You didn't mention quantum computing in China. What's the situation with quantum computing? Quantum computers.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've looked into this, and I'm not an expert in quantum computing, but I have talked to a lot of friends who are in the space, and they're telling me these things are 10 plus years away from practical real world use. Right? I don't think that is going to be one of the first things that will impact our world. So there's a lot of other things that are much closer to making real world impact. So.
Hi, Alvin. Thank you for taking the time to do this presentation. My name is Caitlin. I'm an undergrad at Harvard. Out recently a lot is China's rapid development and establishment as a global superpower. And so as we approach a world order where we have two powers grounded on such different ideologies, one where we have the United States with the values of a democratic republic, whereas on the other hand you have China with its communist background, I was just curious if you could provide a policy recommendation to both Washington and also Beijing on achieving this future of AI cooperation. What would you do? Because I want to be an optimist and believe that we can achieve that, but in the current state, it seems very difficult for such competing powers to be so cooperative.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand that the two countries have different philosophies in terms of how to manage its countries, but I don't know if they're competing, right? Because if what we used to think is, let's say two countries are bordering each other, they're going to compete, they're going to take over each other. At least from the China perspective, and I've talked to a lot of people there, there's nobody there that has ever told me they want to take over America. Nobody said, I want to destroy, in fact, nobody even said, I want to spread communism outside of China. Right? I mean, during the Vietnam War, everybody had the domino theory. If Vietnam fell, everything would be communist. And Vietnam fell, and what happened? Nothing. Right? So I think we, as America needs to respect how other countries want to manage itself, how to manage its own country. And I think China actually has something called a non-interventionist policy. They do the BRI with 140 countries, but they have not created any regime changes. I think America has been documented to have created 40 to 50 regime changes in the last 40 years or something that sort, right? So the key is, America wants to spread American management and doctrine around the world. China actually doesn't have that. So I don't know if they're competing in that way. And I don't think China's going to be like America, and America's not going to be like China. And it's okay. Right? As long as they see each other as partners, and they change the current adversarial relationship, they've actually been very cooperative since the WTO and since the Nixon opening up of China. I think it's been a win-win for both countries until now, and we should keep it that way.
It's not a Star Trek question.
Oh, Star Trek question.
So, no, I said it's not a Star Trek. So, the Made in China initiative was 2015, right? And it was for 2025.
Yes.
And if you look at the Made in China 2025 plan and match that against the Project 2025 plan,
yes,
you see two very, very different visions.
Yes.
And it goes back to the slide I think you talked about, the investments that China made in infrastructure versus the choices that we made.
Yeah.
Critical minerals are almost all in China.
Mm-hmm.
The PhD production of scientists and engineers is eclipsing us by factors.
It's more than the rest of the world combined. Yeah.
The challenge, aside from American exceptionalism, is that when Xi went to meet with Putin and formed that alliance, that I think changed things in terms of the calculus of how apt we are to cooperate.
Yeah. So if you look at this, I know there's a lot of angst around the Xi-Putin thing, but if you look at what happened, when Putin invaded Ukraine, China didn't sell any weapons, right? They didn't send any soldiers. They didn't publicly support the war. In fact, they tried to create a ceasefire talk between the countries. They came up with multiple plans to try to create peace. I think that at least from a perspective of, if I had a neighbor that was, had a 3,000-4,000 mile border with me, I would want to have peace with them. And so I'm not going to go and support them. I'm not going to go and create angst for them. I'm not going to fight them. But then I also aren't going to support them in terms of building a imperialistic war, right? And I think if you were in the shoes of Xi, I think he's actually done the minimal possible to keep that friendship with their bordering country. At the same time, not try to accentuate or accelerate a war result that was helping the Russians. Right? In fact, if you look at the oil sales, India actually bought more oil from Russia during this period than China did. And then they took that oil and then sold it to Europe, right? So, America blew up the pipeline, right? So it's I think from all the things that happened with that war, China probably did the least minimum possible to support that kind of a war. So. Thank you, Alvin. So I'll stay for a little bit if there's more questions. So.